What's up everyone? Today I'll be going through my round 9 AFL tips and predictions, and as you can see right here on the screen, there's a little bit of a timestamp for you guys to just get straight into the tips if you guys don't want to sit through some of the other stuff that I normally review for my tips videos. So if you just want to get right into the tips, click on the time on the screen, and for everyone else, we'll start reviewing everything else. So we'll review round 8 to see how the round went for mine, and I know it didn't go very well for some reason, so it looks like I forgot to actually click submit on the tips, so it ended up with a 4 out of 9, and that was the score I got in my tips, so it sort of worked at the end of the day. I said Port Adelaide last week to win. On Friday, I tipped the Blues to beat the Pies. Originally, I actually tipped the Pies by 6, but changed it last minute, so it just goes to show how unlucky I've been at certain stages with my tipping. Got that one incorrect. Finally got a good 50-51 correct. I did tip the Swans last week. Then I tipped the Saints. I tipped the Cats. So another 50-50 game I got wrong. I tipped Essendon. I tipped Freo and finished poorly tipping the Western Bulldogs. I think most people would have tipped the Dogs, and I tipped the Suns in the upset. So if you want to actually see my tips, you can go through back on last video, but for some reason they weren't registered there. But like I said last week, I'm like, bet you I get all these 50-50 games incorrect. And 3 of the 50-50 games I got incorrect, as well as an upset tip. Now, looking at my tipping comp for round 8 on the phone, we had a couple people get a score of 16 using their joker, so they got an 8 with a double points. Jack Ristrom, the only name shown there, as you can see. And then we got quite a few with 14, 12. We got a total of 52 that got a joker that got a score of more than 10. And then a few that got a score of 8 without using the joker. So we had Lockie Carter with a tip of 8 and a margin of 5. And a few more that got an 8. But I'd say the average score for this round would have been like a 5 or a 6. It wasn't a very great round for most people. But as we take a look overall, we've got Budsy 96 in the lead by 3. Once again, even though we got a score of only the 4 in round 8, he still leads it by 3. Himarsh with a 67, X2 Vivision 66, Sammy H 66, and then rounding out the top 11, we've got quite a few with a score of 65. If you thought my tips are bad, my big calls were even worse. So the 4 years that I've done these tips videos and the big calls, this was by far, I think, the worst ever week I've ever had for my big calls. Not only did I get not a single one correct with a score of 0, but I didn't get a single one of these big calls even close to getting correct. The first game, I will review them because of how badly they were. The first game was Adelaide Port. I said 6 lead changes that would occur in the first half, and we didn't see a single lead change, not only in the first half, but all game. Then I said that Charlie Kerner would kick 5 or more goals in the game against Collingwood. He only kicked the 2. Sydney v GWS, I said that both sides would record over 100 points, and that was kind of already not going to happen before the game started with the weather. It was going to be raining all game. I need to check the weather forecast in future times I do these tipping videos and big calls because, you know, obviously that never got up. Saints v North, I said that Saints would score 18 or more goals. They scored 15, so that was probably the closest one I got in the entire round. Melbourne v Geelong, I said that the Cats are led for 80% or more of the game. They led for not even 20% of the game. West Coast Essendon, I said that Eagles lead for longer but lose. Of course, the Eagles were only in front for like 3 minutes of the entire game. And then in Richmond v Freo, I said that Nat Fyfe would record another 30 or more disposals. He was put on as a sub and only had 8. In Dogs v Hawthorn, I said the Dogs would kick 7 or more consecutive goals. They kicked the first 3 goals, but that was the most goals I had in any succession during the game, and just about the worst big call of the round. I said in Brisbane Gold Coast that the Suns would lead at every break, and we all know how bad the Suns were in that game. They didn't lead, of course, at any break. So 0 out of 9. For next week, I've got to get a 3 out of 9. And to see which punishment I have to do for this round, for round 8, from Thomas Footy with 152 likes, was to watch Fireman Sam on a live stream for 3 hours. I was going to do it originally after this video was out, like on my second channel today. Instead, tomorrow from 5 to 8 p.m. on my second channel, which will be in the link in the description. You click on that, and tomorrow I'll make like a little community post as well when I do that live stream for 3 hours. It will be a waste of time, but I have to get them done, so there you go. And if you've got any other punishments you want to see me do, as mentioned before, I've got to get 3 to avoid the big call punishments this week. Just comment down below the punishments down below. And before we start with the tips, I know I normally go through my fantasy. That was about as bad as it could get with fantasy, with all the injuries and all that, and like the captaincy issues. I think I ended up getting a score like in the 1800s, so just not even worth going over. Let's just get straight into my tips. All right, for the first game on the Thursday night, we've got Carlton and Melbourne. This would have to be the toughest game, I reckon, to tip all round. It's certainly the closest when it comes to the tipsters, with 46% going Carlton and just a little bit more with 54% going Melbourne. And it probably makes sense why Melbourne are just about the slight favourites, especially with what we saw last week. Carlton last week were involved in a really close game against the Pies. I thought they were always just going to find a way to get over the line, because the Blues, especially the last 10 or 15 weeks, and all the close games they've been a part of, they normally seem to get the wins. But now that the Blues are starting to get involved in some more close games, they're starting to lose a couple more. We saw it against Adelaide. You can make the argument the Cats game was close as well, and they lost that one. The Blues now are sitting 5-3 and would be quite angry with that loss, considering it was against Collingwood, their arch rivals, and it was a game that they probably should have won, given a lot of the chance they had, particularly early on in that game. For Melbourne though, they got a win against the Cats to finally break their unbeaten run, so the Cats are now 7-1, and the D's are looking pretty good now in the top 4. I mean, I thought the D's against the Cats were coached quite well. They used the ball inside 50 quite smart. I thought Bailey Fritsch and Cozzy Pickett up forward were, you know, two very, very important targets. Obviously, Fritsch kicking that winning goal in the dying minutes, and Tom McDonald basically having Jeremy Cameron under his pocket with no influence. The D's of the Blues in the last couple of games have been involved in some tight ones for sure, particularly that final last year. So I reckon this is going to be another pretty close one for the most part. I think it's going to be low scoring with how the D's have been going about it as of late, but I'm going to say the D's by mine. I'm just going to slightly trust them a little bit more. I think I haven't really been too confident with the D's so far in my tips. I've never really been backing them in. I think for now, it's finally a time where I should trust them against a good side. So we're going the D's by 5. My big call is that Curnow and Mackay combined for 3 or less goals. We've got a couple games on the Friday because of the Mother's Day weekend. I originally wasn't a big fan of having the 2 Friday games, but I'm starting to get, you know, a little bit more adjusted to it, and I don't mind it now as much because, I mean, I guess overall it's better for attendances because you don't get as much on the Sunday. The first game is at GMHBA between Geelong and Port. I'll be streaming both of these Friday games, but currently the odds are saying that the Cats will get this win with a 97% tipping percentage to 3 for Port Adelaide. And it's probably because of how poor the Power were last week. I mean, they've had a poor month, but their last week against the Crows in the showdown was very, very pathetic in terms of their, you know, ability to convert up forward. They kicked 2 goals, 14 after quarter time. They had plenty of chances. They just were terrible up forward, and no one really stepped up when it comes to the goal kicking, apart from maybe Horn Francis in the last quarter. He had a couple of goals. He was the only player I can think of after quarter time who could score for them. And I mean, this game's going to be played at GMHBA. It's not going to be played at the Adelaide Oval. Dimensions are always favouring towards the Cats, and in front of their home fans, it's going to be really tough for Port Adelaide to get any chance of winning this game, considering they haven't beaten the Cats there since 2007. And Geelong, well, they obviously suffered their first loss at the hands of the D's, but they weren't that bad. I thought they had chances late, like particularly Jeremy Cameron, but they were ultimately, in my opinion, just chasing tails a little bit. The D's just had that slight advantage after half time. I mean, I did show up in that second quarter when the game was a snooze fest with no goals, but it ended up being quite a close game of footy. The Cats, yeah, I wouldn't say they'd be too worried about that loss. You can have one of those games where you play against this top side and just can't seem to find enough opportunities. They kicked 9 goals, 12, so bad kicking, I guess, cost them, but same with the D's. They also kicked 10 goals, 14. I think the Cats definitely bounce back in this game. I see it really difficult for Port winning with how they're going at the moment. Rosie won't be playing. They'll have a couple more outs to Power as well, and I think their defence is just a little bit too weak for the Cats forward line, so I think they're going to put on too much of a score for Port to defend, and I'm going to go the Cats to win it by 16 points, although I think it's going to be a similar game to how it was played last year. Port will be competitive for most of the game. The Cats will always be a class above, and I think the Cats will win every quarter as my big call. And the game afterwards on the Friday at 8:20 PM at Optus Stadium, we've got Fremantle take on Sydney. This game of the two, definitely one I'm keeping my eyes open for a little bit more. One I'm definitely more interested in, considering now the Swans, after beating the Giants last week, are now the premiership favourites. We'll get a bit of a good read on Fremantle to see if they're good enough to compete against the competition's best. And the Swans, yeah, obviously after beating GWS, have proven themselves to be, I think, premiership favourites now. They've got a record of 7-1. They're sitting first on the ladder. And after quarter time, they basically stranglehold of the Giants in a gritty game in the wet. I thought they definitely played the conditions a lot better. I watched a bit of the replays and the highlights. You had Grundy dominate in the ruck. I think he was probably the best ruckman all week. And then, of course, for the Swans, they had the usual stepping up once again in Heaney, Goulden, Warner. They were also very good in the midfield, and they were also kicking goals. All 3 of them kicked goals, which is something that a lot of other midfield groups don't do quite as well. But Sydney's midfield trio and those 3 have combined for a total of 30 goals until round 8 so far this season, which is quite incredible. So it's going to be tough for Freo to back up their work, but it is at home, and I think they're definitely capable. They only had 1 bad game all year, really, and that was against West Coast. But apart from that, they've been competing in all other games. I mean, at home, they haven't dropped one, if you can't really count that West Coast game. And last week, I thought they were quite strong against Richmond. Thought Tracy is looking really good up forward. He kicked 4 goals. Him and a miss up forward could be quite scary. Luke Ryan had an incredible game down back. He recorded 31 kicks, 39 disposals. Sarong also continuing his brilliant form of the season. And Hayden Young as well was great in the midfield, and he ended up kicking 2 goals as well. So Freo had a lot of really good contributors in that game, and I thought, yeah, they were just way too strong for Richmond. Had a big last quarter, kicking 7. It'll be, I think, a low-scoring game back at Optus Stadium. I think Freo like to make things low-scoring against the best sides, and I think, unlike the games at the Adelaide Oval where they just lost against Port and Carlton, I think they're going to find a way to win this game and get on the right end of a close game, and I think the Dockers get the job done by 9 points, with my big call Freo and Sydney combined for 145 or less points. We now head to the games on the Saturday, and we start at 1:45 p.m. at UTAS between Hawthorn and St Kilda. I'll be at attending to this game, and it's certainly a danger game for the Saints to feel, especially after Hawthorn's strong win against the Dogs last week. I thought it was a full four-quarter performance from the Hawks, who were just collectively tougher, I feel like, overall as a group over the Dogs. I thought James Sicily was back to his best. It was good to see Cashier debut and kick a couple of goals as well, and it was good to see Ginnivan late getting a goal and all that. So I thought, the Hawks are going to have some confidence after that win for sure, particularly given that this game's in Tassie, and St Kilda, they haven't started the season off brilliantly, so they're definitely a gettable side in Hawthorn's eyes. And with the Tassie factor, as mentioned previously, Hawthorn, regardless of where Hawthorn are on the ladder, they're always a pretty tough side to beat in Tassie. So I feel like it'll be a bit tough for the Saints, but at the same time, Hawthorn is 16th, and for the most part, they've been quite a poor side. Saints obviously got the win against the Kangaroos on the weekend. Yeah, I feel like it's just a game you just move on with, really. It's not really a victory many sides are going to be threatened by, nor is it a victory you applaud, but it was good just for St Kilda's sake to see some plays, key plays returning. For example, Mason Wood had an immediate impact. Jack Hayes kicked a couple goals, and it was really good, made it a lot easier for Marshall to have a bit of a chop out. Darcy Wilson, everyone's been talking about how good he's been, and he had another really good game. He's just continuing a really stellar start to his first season, kicking 3 goals, 22 touches, providing so many running plays, and being a real chance for the rising star now. I feel with Darcy Wilson, he's definitely a chance. And Sinclair, he played in the middle after the return of Jimmy Webster, and he had a really good game. He had 150 odd fantasy points, 30 plus disposals, couple goals. So yeah, the Saints are just getting some key personnel back, which is good to see. A few players still needing to find form, for example King, Philippou, Owens, but I think the Saints is just a must-win game for them. I know Hawthorn are going to make it difficult. It's good that the Saints put on a decent score last week, so hopefully they can back it up against Hawthorn side that also have an ability to leak a lot of goals. So I'm going to tip the Saints here. I'm not saying the Saints with a heap of confidence, but realistically, St Kilda should win this game despite it being a Tassie. So I'm going the Saints by 14 points. My big call is that the Saints kick 6 or more goals in any quarter. And then the next game is also quite a tough one to tip, in my opinion. We've got Essendon and GWS at Marvel Stadium. Well, with the Bombers, they're currently 5th on the ladder. Obviously, a bit of a concern with their percentage, but apart from that, they're going quite well and looking like a side that can make finals. They're looking really good, and they do play their best footy at Marvel as well, which is why this might look like an ominous threat for the Giants. If Merritt, who was really, really good against the Eagles last week, Parrish, even Nick Martin, who all played really well against West Coast, all perform at their best against the Giants, they'll make it really tough for them because the Giants, they still have a couple of key personnel out. I'm not sure about Tom Green. I know his ankle injury isn't going to be that serious, but I'm not sure if he's playing this week as well, which would give Essendon the advantage. And obviously Callum Brown, another player, who's suspended. So that'll just let go of a little bit of pressure for Essendon's defence just by a little bit. The Giants definitely were soundly beaten after quarter time. They just weren't quite there. I felt like the Giants, from what I saw in the highlights, Sydney definitely beat them up a little bit more, and I feel like they definitely want to respond against Essendon because the Giants currently have dropped a couple of games of the last 3, so their form is starting to slow down a little bit, but they're still a pretty top side, and I think particularly given the conditions sort of made it tough for them to play their best footy under the roof, I think they're going to be back to their best and will make it tough for the Bombers. I think both sides will be definitely on, but I just think I'm tipping the side that I can trust a little bit more, and the better side in this game will still be the Giants. So I know the Bombers do have the Giants at a good time, but I'm going to go safe with my tip here because I think the Giants should respond back with a win at Marvel Stadium in a good game of footy. I'm going to go the Giants to win this one by 15 points with my big call. The Dons lead at any stage by 20 or more points, but lose the game. Next up with the MCG, we've got Richmond taking on the Western Bulldogs. I know last week I did promise to buy a Bulldog scarf if we got 30 or more likes on a comment. I kind of forgot to do that. I feel bad. I will get my hands on the Bulldog scarf next week, I promise. As well, I did say I was going to support Bulldogs in a game, so I can't be this game because I'll be in Tassie, but it'll be a future game. But we've got Richmond, the Western Bulldogs, and this is a pretty interesting game of footy when you think about it. On paper, you'd think the Dogs win, but the Dogs, overall, have really disappointed, all season, but particularly in the last month of footy. Last week as well against Hawthorn, they kind of lost the unlosable game. In my Footy Abroad appearance, I said that if there was a lock of the week, that I thought it was the Dogs beating the Hawks. I just didn't really think the Hawks would have that much firepower in them. And I thought the Dogs would respond after a poor game against Freo, when realistically they were in that game for most of the contest. The Dogs are just lucky in a way. They've got a pretty soft fixture. Realistically, they haven't had the hardest start to the season, and They've got Richmond now at a good time. With Richmond, we all know how screwed they are in terms of their injuries. It's been widely documented. They had to play, I think Lafau was a key position forward last week, but it's just, not enough, I don't think, with Richmond. They've just got too much inexperience and lack of quality with their players. And I think, last week against Freo, they always seem to give effort. I thought they gave effort for bits and pieces, particularly in that third. But they did drop off big time in that last, conceding 7 goals and ended up losing by over 50 points. So it was their biggest loss of the season against Freo last week. The Dogs, they're going to respond in some way. They're not going to respond massively, I wouldn't think, with a big win. But they'll respond enough to get a decent win against the Tigers, who at the moment aren't going to be having a great season. They're probably going to be finishing bottom 2. We're going the Dogs to win this game by 22 points, as my big call will be the Dogs score 5 or more behinds than they do goals. We then head to TO Stadium for the Gold Coast Suns take on North Saturday night, which pretty much rounds out a very underwhelming Saturday night in terms of the 2 games of footy. The Suns were pitiful last week, let's be real. We can't really let them off lightly with that game. They had a massive chance to go what would have been 5-3 against Brisbane, who at the time only had 2 wins to the name, were in some poor form. And then not only that, but in the lead up to the game, Brisbane had so many outs that it was basically a calamity for them. They had one on the bench for most of the game, and the Suns didn't even lay a finger on Brisbane. They didn't go anywhere near him. Not only did they not get a chance to win the game, they didn't get anywhere near him. They lost it by 34 points, didn't lead at all for any of the game, and it was just such a boring Q clash. It's just disappointing for Gold Coast, because we just keep talking up the Suns, thinking that this is their year, this is their opportunity, and they always seem to blow it, particularly away. With North, obviously, it's hard to see when they'll get the next win. They versed the Saints on the weekend, and I thought for bits and pieces, they were better than what they have been for most of the year in stages, the Kangaroos, but overall, it was just, again, pretty average from them, pretty disappointing. George Wardle was also really impressive in North Melbourne. He's a shining light in what has been a pretty disappointing start to the season. But overall, the Suns are playing at home. They're good in Darwin, they're good in Gold Coast, they're good against the crap sides, but against really anyone else away particularly, they're a different side. But we're going the Suns to win it by 60 points. My big call that the Suns score 11 or more goals in any half. Well, as noted previously, we've got the 2 games on Sunday. We start at Marvel between Collingwood and West Coast, and it was a massive clutch win from the Pies and Nick Dacos on the weekend to boost them up to 9th on the ladder, and they've now won 5, I think, or 6 of the last 7. They haven't lost since round 2, which was obviously against the Saints. So yeah, they're back in some good form. The Pies, they're looking like they're still a real chance at the premiership this year after a slow start. Yeah, it was a good win from the Pies, and they've got a chance to go as high as 5th now because of the fact that all sides this round in the top 8 are versing each other. If all the top 4 teams win, the Pies go to 5th here, and you'd think they win against West Coast. I mean, I know West Coast have been getting better and all that, but West Coast still on paper against Collingwood seemed to be a little bit too hard to get a matchup on, and I think they should win this well. Collingwood at least looking like a 30-plus point win. The Eagles also could have won on the weekend against Essendon. They had their chances late, actually, and perhaps Cripps may have been the reason why they lost that game. And I know the Eagles now this week are going to be without Yo and Waterman, which are 2 pretty big outs considering how good seasons they both had. I think I'm just going to have to go the Pies in a safe one here, and I think they win it pretty well. I'll go 40 points they win it by. With my big call, Nick Dacos records 2 or more goals and has 30 or more disposals. And then finally, to round out the round, we've got Adelaide and the Brisbane Lions at the Adelaide Oval. Finally, an actual decent game to finish off a round for once. You would have probably expected to this point of the season that both sides after round 8 would be higher on the ladder, not 12th and 13th. However, both sides are finding some form in the last month with, I think, 3 wins to each, Adelaide and Brisbane. I'd say Brisbane just had a little bit of a better win over the Suns than Adelaide did over Port, considering how badly they were screwed by injuries before the game. They only had 1 on the bench for most of the game. They had to bring in a player that played VFL footy and had in Macca's meal 3 hours before a game, and Logan Morris. And they had a lot of key players that stood up against the Suns. For example, Zorko was incredible. Neil Dunkley had round his back pocket. And Chris Fagan said it himself. He said that it was basically the Lions' best win they've ever had when it comes to grit and determination in their history. So you wouldn't think of that if you just see the scoreline with how sort of average of a game it was skill-wise and low scoring and all that. Unfortunately, though, it's probably a win that hurts them more than helps them with all the injuries that they have. Obviously, Adelaide winning in the showdown, and need to play in a showdown every single week because they seem to always get up for the occasion, the Crows, in those showdowns. Another showdown victory. I think that's their 3rd in a row. It was really good to see him getting back to the scoring ways a little bit. Fogarty started off well. Rankin kicked a couple of good games. Saliga in the midfield. It was a great positional change to have him in the midfield because he won the medal and looked like he was at his best. And then Worrell down back was also very good, really making it difficult for the power forwards to score. So the Crows look like they're getting back to their best, and I think this is a game that it's going to be a little bit tough to decide, but I'm definitely leaning towards the Crows with all the factors mentioned, with the fact that the Lions had all those injuries. The Lions now have a 7-day break, all those injuries. The Crows, they're going to be staying in Adelaide for 10-day break. So I'm going to go the Crows to win this game by 6 and a good one, with my big call Adelaide lead by 20 or more points at quarter time. Alrighty, well those were my tips for round 9. I went the D's, the Cats, the Dockers, the Saints, the Giants, the Dogs, the Suns, the Pies, and the Crows. Hopefully I get at least a 6 or 7 out of 9. I've been actually disastrous in the last few weeks, but not only that, I hope I actually can get some big calls correct. So I'm trying to go a little bit more soft kill for the big calls. I need to get 3 this week to avoid a punishment. The fireman stand punishment will be tomorrow as well, so just stay tuned on the More Carman channel for that live stream. Thanks everyone for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, do that now. We're trying to push as close to 40k as we can, and we'll see you soon in my next video. Cheers.